So we're kind of living in this perfect tornado of all the things that are messing with our nervous system. I'm curious about what's happening physiologically to our nervous system while we're living in that. So,
Yeah. So the biggest thing is that we're in this constant state of fight or flight. So sympathetic dominance. What does that mean neurologically? It means that there's a lot of research on this. I mean, this has been very heavily studied for generations. And what we call glucocorticoids or our stress hormones. So cortisol is the main one that we think of. Cortisol actually causes, again, especially in developing nervous systems. So the younger, the more susceptible a person is to these effects. But it actually, including in utero, I mean, I could go off for another hour just about the in utero aspect. But essentially these glucocorticoids, things like cortisol, upregulate the fight or flight response in where we call our limbic center of the brain. It's not quite the lizard brain. It's basically a step above that, but it's our emotional centers. So it's where we make a lot of neuropeptides, hormones, neurotransmitters. It's where emotions are regulated, including fear. The amygdala, which is it's a little almond-shaped part of your brain that directs that fight or flight response. And our hippocampus, where we form memories, all of these things are highly, highly, highly sensitive to the effects of glucocorticoids, including the stress hormone cortisol. So what happens is when we're constantly under stress, especially in somebody who's prone to this. So this is where the genetics comes in. Like in somebody whose parents maybe are also very similarly stressed out amidst minor stressors, the brain will actually grow those emotional centers. So the amygdala, the hippocampus, et cetera, all of those areas of the brain, well, actually the hippocampus will shrink. So we have less long-term memory capacity. The fight or flight response grows. And then the frontal lobe, which is our higher centers, what we are able to what meditation does is increases the frontal lobe activity so that we can overcome those kind of animal instincts or those animal fears. But all of those stress hormones will actually atrophy the frontal lobe. So a person becomes quite literally physically addicted to the effects of stress, and they need that hit of epinephrine or adrenaline to be able to even get through the day, because they don't know how to move through the day in a relaxed state. And it will also just magnify the sense of threat, and that there's always a threat around. And if there's not a threat around, we actually create the threats, so we start to think we might become paranoid or afraid of things that aren't actually trying to hurt us. So it actually does physically chronic stress. And again, especially in younger people, but even in adults, chronic stress actually changes the physical structure of the brain. And the farther down that path you go, the more prone you are to things like dementia and, depletion of Parkinson's disease is a good example. The substantia nigra, where there's dopamine, that's where we make dopamine. They will easily those neurons shrink or are eliminated. Same with if you have enough, if your amygdala gets too big and the hippocampus shrinks, you can get Alzheimer's or other kinds of dementia, lack of memory. So it really does actually change the physical structure of the brain. And these chronic elevations in glucocorticoid levels, cortisol primarily.
yeah, that's helpful to know, because then people kind of have an incentive to really get control of it now instead of put it on the back burner.
Yeah.
Are these things reversible, or are they just permanent?
It's a really good question. In terms of the brain is neuroplastic. It used to be thought that once the brain had developed in a certain way, that was it. There was no going back. It was one and done. Good luck. That's not actually true. And we know now that we can actually structurally change our brains. Not only that, more importantly, we can actually change the connections between various parts of our brains. And again, let's say, just going back to the meditation example, doing a lot of meditation or breath work will actually turn on your vagus nerve, because you're moving your abdomen in such a way that you turn on that rest and digest parasympathetic, relax, rejuvenate branch of your nervous system.
Mm.
And that will feedback, increase more of your frontal lobe and decrease those signals from the limbic center, like the amygdala, the fight or flight. So not only can you actually physically change the structure of your brain, but you can make more connections and kind of overcome anything, any damage or any physical adaptation that's already occurred. Let's say, somebody who had a really difficult childhood and had a lot of adverse events, what we call ACEs. Well, if they really work hard to learn how to self-regulate through all of these various modalities, they can actually change the structure and also change the function of the nervous system. And there are catalysts as well, things that we call neuroplastogens that will just catalyze the ability to create new connections and overcome some of those deficits that might be inherited.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. I think maybe in the future we can do a deep dive on how we can rewire our brains.
Oh yeah, that's a big passion of mine. So I'm definitely down to go down that route.